Let's take a look at how to program drum sounds within the Korg Wavestate. So we'll start by selecting our initial performance. You hit perform and then turn counterclockwise really fast. I'll bring you to init performance. Hit enter. And now we have our initial performance. Let's just hear it. Cool. So we go to sample and make sure you're on WSeek steps rather than set list. So hit WSeek steps. That brings you to your sample bank. So let's listen to just the first sample. Hit enter and we press the first sample. Let's listen to it. Now let's change the sample to a kick. We go to MS, which is multi-sample, and we select the sample. And so once we get to the page of all of our samples, a lot of samples here. If we want to just isolate the kicks, we can hit shift, back, category. Then turn the knob, brings us into category. And let's choose kick. So many options here. Let's listen to some of them. Cool. So I like this jazz sample. Okay, so let's hit enter. And now we have a kick drum loaded for our first sample. Let's isolate our second sample. And we're going to do the same thing. So we'll be at the multi-sample selection, wave, turn the knob, brings us into our sample selection. You can hit shift, back, category. Then this time, instead of going to kick, we'll go down one to snare. Hit enter, and let's listen to our snare. So tons of options. Let's go with this ambi. Let's go with the ambi pop. There's a nice kind of snappiness to it. Okay, hit enter. Now we have our kick and our snare. Cool. Now we just want to adjust the timing. So within the Korg Wavestate, to program drums, each one of your percussion samples will be linked to a certain length of time. And so just to begin, let's start with something very simple, where we have a quarter note kick and a quarter note snare. And just for clarity, I'm going to create a length of 2 for the timing lane. So 2 different steps for the timing lane, each of which will be for a quarter note. So first we need to shift the timing lane to be in tempo mode. So right now, if we listen to it, 2 things are happening. It doesn't sound very clear. Now, one thing is that the duration is in time, and the second thing is that we have a crossfade on. For percussion samples, the attack is really important, so we don't want any sort of crossfade that might muddy the attack. So we can turn this counterclockwise all the way down. Or alternatively, we can go into our timing in general. So you want to go to the first page for the timing lane. Let's say you're on the first step of your timing lane, so step A1. You can hit shift back, and that'll bring you to the first page. Or if you hit the timing lane button up here in the wave sequence lanes, that'll also bring you to the first page. And you can select your crossfade to be time, tempo, or off. So let's just leave it off for now, though we could play with that to get some interesting effects later on for sound design purposes. So right now we have one step. You see our loop start is A1, our loop end is A1 for the timing lane. Let's just listen to what's happening. So we have our step A1, which is duration for 1 second. Now we want this to be in a rhythmic value rather than a time value. Of course, you could use the time values and get some interesting effects out of that, such as having very low values. something I explored in my other video on granular effects in the Korg Wavestate, which you can find here. So you can get some interesting effects out of using the duration as just time itself rather than a tempo. But if you want your steps to be metrically significant in their value, we can hit Shift and then our timing lane, then our tempo button will light up. And this will make it so that our timing is all in some sort of rhythmically significant value. So right now we have eighth notes. Let's listen to that. Gives us triplets, dotted eighth, and now our quarter note. So right there we have quarter note kick, quarter note snare. Now we have one step that's active. If we look at our loop end for our timing lane, it's at A1. Now if we expand that to A2, we have two steps. Let's first listen to that. So right now they're both at quarter note. By default, the step will be at eighth note. You can change that to a quarter note for A2. Now let's just listen. Now it sounds the same, but we can change this value, say, to an eighth note, and we get a kind of 3/8 feel. Let's try it. So a nice kind of triple feel there. If we hit our perform, you can actually see what step we're on in the timing and sample lane. You can see that they're both synced up right now. We can add in some other values. So let's say we want some hats. Let's go to our sample lane. We only have these two steps right now. We want to expand that to have all 16 steps. So let's hit Shift and then our page plus or our forward button. And that'll bring us to the third page of the sample lane utility. And we can add steps to end. And we'll add 14 steps. Now let's hear it. So not much of a change because we haven't changed our loop end. So if we go to our sample lane, then we move the loop end knob, we can now hear our 14 new steps. And those steps will use the last sample. And so it's all our snare sound. Now let's say we wanted some hat sounds. We can do a number of things here. We could mess with this snare sound by changing the octave. And that octave, let's hit enter. That kind of sounds hat-ish. But if we want an actual hat sound, we could go into our sample lane, once again, MS, turn the knob, shift, back, category, and we can go and find cymbals. So tons of hi-hats here. Let's try this crisp open. So the octave's up, we can turn that octave down. But I kind of like it with the octave up, personally. Maybe just +1. We'll unsolo. Now let's listen to that. So we know that on A1 we have our kick, A2 we have our snare, A3 we have our hat. And if you want to copy these steps, move them to different locations, we can do that in the third part of the sample lane where we can copy, we can insert, we can paste. That's the sample lane utility. So let's think about the steps that we want our kick on. So we'll go to A1. So from step A1 through step A1, we'll copy that by hitting enter. And let's maybe put our kick on beats 1, beat 7, beats 9, and beats 14. So here, 7, hit enter, 9, hit enter, and 14. We'll think about our snare. Let's put our snare, so copy step A2, that's our snare. Let's put that on beats 5 and beats 13, kind of classic 2 and 4 for the snare. So we have that copied. So now we want to go to our action, paste steps, and we'll paste it to A5, and we'll paste it to A13. Now lastly, we have our hat. So copy steps, A3, hit enter, and let's paste that onto our old snare step of A2 first. And we'll paste it A4, A6, A8, A10, A11, A12, A15, and A16. Now we have that kind of triple feel right now in our timing lane, where our first step is the quarter note and our second step is the eighth note. Let's change our duration for the first one to a 16th, and to the second one to a 16th as well. Now let's listen to what we have. So this sounds like a solid drum part, and you could just leave it at that. You might like that. Now of course, you can go to your sample lane and you can choose any step and switch it out for something else. So let's say we wanted like a different kick on step 8. You can go into our category, kick. So let's first isolate that. Let's do this clangor. Let's see what that's like. Enter. So our octave is up 1 for the clangor, but I actually kind of like that. We can even go in and copy that. So copy steps 8, and then we'll paste it to say step 16. Let's just see what happens. And as this plays, you can kind of mess with the octave. Another value you can mess with is the sample offset, which will take out the attack for the sample. So you can try that for your different ones. And that'll give you some different effects. You can play with the octave, semitones. So you can get creative with that and manipulate some of the parameters in here. And of course, you can play around with your timing lane. So let's add 14 steps. That'll bring us up to 16 steps, all with 16th notes. But we can play with that. We can make some steps longer. We'll add some eighth notes. We'll add some dotted values as well. I'll just see how this sounds. And we'll give that a listen. And of course we can also change the loop end so that they become phasing with one another. And that's really the beauty of Wavestate sequencing, where you have your 16 steps for your sample, and say here we're just going to have 12 steps for our timing, and those will play with one another. And so each time they loop around, they'll be paired up differently between the steps. Let's listen to that. So you can see how they're phasing with one another in our performance view here. Cool. So that's a basic introduction to programming drums within the Korg Wavestate. Of course, we can add effects, we can add compression, we can add wave shaping. I love the wave shaper in here, by the way. Some really juicy things out of this. There's a lot more that we can cover in terms of ways to modulate this pattern. You're of course welcome to explore that on your own in terms of mapping the LFOs, or say using the step sequence to determine your multiplication amount for your timing lane, etc., etc. There's a lot of ways that we can create generative structures within this device. So we'll look at that next time. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions or feedback, you can leave it in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, please subscribe. I have more tutorials to come, so I'll see you next time.